What's up, everyone, and welcome to the Corporate Bartender. Are you an introverted leader, or have you ever worked for one? Well, as a card-carrying introvert, I can tell you, the struggle is real. We're in for a treat today because we've got Sharissa Deppen on the program. Who's Sharissa Deppen? Stick around. She's a CEO, leadership and executive coach who cut her teeth in technology leadership positions. Sharissa is also a TEDx speaker, award-winning international keynoter, columnist for Forbes and the Huffington Post, and a professor at Southeastern University. This was a fantastic conversation, and you know what I'm going to say. I think you're going to dig it. So buckle up, TCBers, grab your favorite cocktail, and let's get right on into it with Sharissa Deppen on today's TCB.
Welcome to SkyTeam's The Corporate Bartender, where we gather some of the best HR and people leaders to discuss what's happening on the people side of business. Now pull up a stool, belly up to the bar, and join us for The Corporate Bartender.
Welcome, everybody. It's Wednesday. You know what that means. It's your favorite day and mine. It's Corporate Bartender Day. And it is the 22nd of January, 2025. I believe we have one more Wednesday in January. And then we are 1/12 complete with this new year, which I love to irritate Ruby by saying that just means we're a few days closer to pumpkin spice time and Christmas. She's giving me the evil leer. Today's going to be a fun day. We have a guest. Her name is Sharissa Deppen, and she is the CEO of a company called Leadership Mastery Alliance. She's a leadership and executive coach with an MBA and a master's in science and technology leadership. She's been there, done that, got the t-shirt. I'll tell you more about her in just a little bit, but housekeeping first. We have dark days ahead, and I don't mean that in the doomy and gloomy sense. I just mean that, like the theater, TCB will be dark on these two dates so far. January 29th, that is next Wednesday, as I will be leaving DC and headed for Georgia. And then on February 12th, Ruby and I will be in Boston. So we won't be doing this on those days because doing it on the road takes a little bit of extra work. And we did an episode.
A lot of extra luggage. There's a lot of gear, and there's lights, and there's sound.
I know. And I have so many booked now that I know I'm going to be doing it on the road multiple times this year. And this is why I put the start the recording, Eric, because we had a guest whose episode just went live. Her name is Nada Sanders. She wrote a book called The Hue Machine. It's about AI and human interaction. And I'll just go ahead and be honest here. I got 15 minutes deep into the interview when I realized, as she was answering a question and she was talking and talking and talking, I did not want to interrupt her. But I knew for the duration of her answer that we were going to have to start over again. And that, for me, is no bueno. So I have checked. The record button is pushed. The red light is on. In those weeks that we are not dark, we have some upcoming guests that are interesting and will be fabulous. On the 5th of February, we have Kelly McDonald. She's the author of a book called How to Work With and Lead People Not Like You. Practical solutions for today's diverse workplace. In our travels at SkyTeam, Ruby and I have come across people that are really good at leading people that are like them. But when you get outside of their lane, their unilateral approach to leadership doesn't always take hold. So we're going to talk about how to do that. On the 26th, we have Linda Ugolo. She wrote a book called Delight in the Limelight. Overcome your fear of being seen and realize your dreams. And if we could realize dreams on a Wednesday afternoon, I'm going to call that a win. And then
I'm hoping Linda speaks in rhyme always.
I think we should challenge her to do so. Right. Dr. Seuss it up, Linda. And then on March 5th, we have a returning guest, Robin Bolton. She is an innovation on the people side of business person. And when she was on a couple of years ago, she was threatening to write a book. Turns out she's gone and done that. She's written a book. It's called Unlocking Innovation, a leader's guide for turning bold ideas into tangible results. And it was funny because when I saw her book cover, I said, "Where did you publish? Not Page 2 by chance, did you?" She was like, "Yes, how did you know?" I said, "Because so did we, and I recognize that art department anywhere." But today is all about Sharissa. We're going to get into some conversation about introverted leaders and servant leadership, two topics that are near and dear to Sky Team's heart. And I know they're near and dear to Ruby's heart because she talks about them all the time. So again, Sharissa is the CEO of Leadership Mastery Alliance. She supports introverted servant leaders and women leaders who are in corporate leadership. She's a leadership and executive coach. Like I said, she's got 2 master's degrees. She's a sought-after speaker, author, columnist, and executive coach. She's even done a TEDx on the pursuit of happiness at work. So that focus on introverted and servant leaders, we're going to get into that today. We did not warn her, but let's give her a warm TCB welcome, shall we? See, Sharissa, we dance people onto the show.
I like that.
Yeah. And I let the music play until the guest starts to dance. So,
there you go.
And I'm not going to stereotype here, but there is a demographic or two that resists the dancing. So sometimes we have an awkward moment where there's just music and we're just waiting. We're all dancing. Awesome. Thank you, Sharissa, for being here with us today.
Absolutely. You have an introvert here that loves to dance. So, you know what? Anytime you put that music on, you're going to see me move.
It's going to happen.
So it's all good. It's going to happen. So it's all good.
I love it. Awesome. Well, we always like to start with our guests to learn a little bit about where they come from and how in the world they ended up doing whatever it is that they do today. Because I imagine as a little kid, you didn't say, when I grow up, introverted leaders and servant leadership, it's going to be my jam. I'm going to help those people get better at what they do. Tell us a little bit about where it started and how it's going now.
Absolutely. And I love this question because you're forcing me to kind of go back to childhood, which, I don't always get a question like that where it's like, okay, let me rewind way, way back to think about what did I actually want to do when I was little? And so 2 quick things, 2 aspirations, I guess I had when I was little. 1, I wanted to be a marine biologist because I love dolphins. Dolphins are my favorite animal. One of the many reasons that I live in Florida, but that's a side note. But then I actually had an opportunity to kind of go behind the scenes at an aquarium and see what they actually do. And funny part about that is I was like, oh, this is kind of smelly. I'm out. I don't think I'm going to be doing that anymore. I don't want to have anything to do with that. Yeah, it kind of smells and you have to be there the whole day. So not for me. And so that was one of the things that that I was interested in. And then the other thing that I was really interested in, which is I'm weird. Like, I don't even know where this came from, but I was very interested in like natural medicine, like holistic medicine and that kind of stuff when I was in my teenagers, like maybe 13 or 14. Again, very, very different from what I actually ended up doing. But the interesting thing is a few years after that, fast forward to when I actually had to make a decision of like, okay, where am I going? What am I doing with my career? And I had absolutely no clue. I got to the point where I was, 17, 18 years old and I went to my dad. I'm like, okay, Dad, I have no idea. I have no clue where I'm going next year. And I need
And what did Dad say?
Dad was like, well, what are you good at? Let's look at your grades. Like, what subjects are you good at?
Oh, Dad, the pragmatist.
Right? And so he was like, well, you like math and science, and there's this whole tech thing that's moving, and that will age me because that was back when it wasn't a huge thing. And so he was like, well, there's this thing, in technology, and it seems to combine all the things that you like. Why don't you just try it out? And so long story short, I ended up, studying software engineering. That's my undergrad degree. And then moved on to do my master's degree in technology leadership. But when I started out in that career, there was a lot of it that I liked because I think technology, especially the software engineering piece of it, plays really well to my introverted ways. And I was like, oh, I can kind of be the behind the scenes person, just doing what I need to do. And, I feel like I'm making impact and working on the innovation side, and all that was great. But then fast forward towards the end of my career. So from there, I went into leadership, technology leadership. And so even though there were a lot of things that I really loved about it, it really stretched me in a lot of good ways. I love working with people. Of course, I do that every day now. Love supporting them and just helping them, to grow and to get to wherever they want to get to in their career and things like that. But the part that was really a struggle for me, or the part that kind of led me towards burnout, was I was being stretched just way too thin. I worked for like several global companies. I was a single mom at the time. So trying to juggle all of that, trying to navigate schedules and very high demands. Like it was a very, very stressful, there were several very stressful jobs that I had at that time. And so just trying to navigate that, I was like, okay, I'm very quickly heading towards burnout here. Something's got to give. And honestly, my journey is very much a faith journey. So at that point, I was like, I can't figure this out on my own. I have no clue. Like when I look at my career, this is all I've known. I don't know what the options are and all of that. And so I kind of prayed about it. I was like, okay, God, you've got to take the reins because I have no clue where I'm going and what I'm doing. And interesting story, soon after that, I was introduced to coaching. And I actually got introduced to coaching through Groupon, of all places, being like a very frugal single mom.
Hold on. Groupon. That's the first time I think Groupon has been mentioned on the Bartender. Right? That is kicking it old school, Sharissa.
Oh, very old school. Shout out to Groupon. But what ended up happening is a career coach happened to put an ad on Groupon. And so I'm just scrolling through, not even thinking about anything related to that. And I see all of these questions. So he asked all the right questions. It's like, are you feeling stuck in your career? Do you feel like you just don't know what that next step is? And you need some help and clarity on, where you're going next. And I'm like, oh my goodness, you're in my head. How is this possible? And so that was my first introduction to coaching. And so through the coaching process is where I really started to, he asked all the right questions to help me to understand who I am, how I'm wired, what am I passionate about? What do I care about? What are my strengths? All of these things that I do now as a coach. And that was enough of a taste of coaching to get me curious. And, I was like, wait a second, this aligns really well. All these strengths really align very well with who I am and what I'm interested in. So let me explore this a little bit more. So then what I did is I enrolled in a coaching school. And as soon as I did that, I was like, oh my goodness, I found the thing. Like this is what I'm doing. And so transitioned into my business now a little over 11 years ago, which is so crazy. And so I made that leap and started the business and here I am. And so a couple of years ago, I think it's been a little over a year now, what I decided to do is really be specific in who I serve. And so I landed on introverted servant leaders because in all of my experience in all of those 10 years, there are a couple of things. One is I really identify as an introverted servant leader. And I know there are particular struggles that especially women go through, like when they are, introverted servant leaders. And I struggled with just because I wasn't clear on who I was and my strengths and all of that. I actually looked at them as weaknesses. And I was like, well, how do I fit in this space? And how do I lead in a way that makes sense to me? And I couldn't figure it out because I was trying to be somebody that I wasn't. And so over the years, what I've noticed is I tend to attract a lot of introverted servant leaders. And the reason that I use the word servant leaders is because these are people that really have a heart for others. They don't have a desire to be in the spotlight. They don't need all the, the accolades or the awards and pats on the back and all of that. They just want to serve. They want to help others. They want to just contribute and make a difference. And so that's how I ended up focusing specifically on introverted servant leaders to help them to really thrive and to feel good about leveraging those strengths, understanding how they're wired, and being able to show up in a way where they're really confident and they can still achieve everything that they want to, but in a way that feels really good to them.
So I love that story, and being an introvert, I would imagine having a tech company job with all of the accoutrement that comes with tech company jobs, good benefits, working a lot, right? Pushing too close to burnout. But as an introvert, how did you make that leap? How did you get yourself ready to stand on the precipice and jump?
Oh, that's such a good question. Honestly, it goes back to my faith journey. I just put all my trust. I was like, okay, God, I have no clue what I'm doing. I don't know how to do this. No experience in business, no experience in marketing, no clue about how to make a transition from corporate into the business world. But because I had such a passion, I feel like there was something that ignited in me. I was like, oh my goodness, I can help other people that, were in the similar place that I was in leadership, trying to figure out how to navigate this. And I'm like, surely if I feel so strongly about it and I have this burning passion and desire to help, I'll figure out the rest, right? Like I'll just jump, I'll figure out.
I love it.
through a lot of like prayer and like confirmation, like, okay, I'm on the right path here. I eventually just said, you know what, if I don't do this, and also my other piece, like my other motivation or piece of this puzzle was my daughter. I was like, what am I modeling for her?
Yeah.
Right. So teaching her as I go navigate this process. If I'm holding myself back in fear, what does that teach her about going after the things that are important to her? And so that was another catalyst for me to say, you know what, I'm going to do this, and she's going to watch me as I navigate this, and we'll figure it out.
So I'm wondering if you inspired any rebel behavior in her during her teenage years.
What's so funny is that I would have been considered, like, my parents will tell you, I was probably the rebel of the family. And interestingly enough, the way, like, I'm very like, okay, if I feel strongly about something, I'm like, let's jump. Let's just go. Let's go do it. Where's the next adventure, right? And I've always been wired that way. And so I think what happened was, when she saw me take these giant risks and these leaps, she ended up and she's 20 years old now. And so it's so fascinating for me to see her, her personality and all of that evolve. But she tends to be a lot more pragmatic than me, like a lot more, like cautious. And she's like, but mom, have you considered, all these other things? I'm like,
no, we don't need to consider that. Let's just do it.
It'll be fine.
I want to touch back on, your tech leadership days, because, I think tech companies, I come from tech company, Ruby comes from tech company, Lori's worked at a tech company for the last decade. Introverts, I mean, there's an alignment between developers, coders, engineers, and introversion, right? Not to say that all developers are introverts, but many introverts are developers. So, and there's another thing that happens in tech companies that we see all the time. People get promoted into leadership jobs because they're really good at doing a thing, right? So I'm a developer and I like to put my headphones on and write code, and I get real good at it. And as a reward, somebody that sits up the food chain from me says, hey, we should tap that person to go lead this team because they're really good at doing this thing. So not only am I not super skilled in this whole management of people thing, I'm an introvert too. I don't know that I even really want to do this gig. Is that something that you see a lot in the practice that you have now?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. So there's two different, so this kind of goes back to the clients that I have. So there's two different ways that I get my clients. One is those that just raise their hands themselves. They come directly into my business and say, okay, I need coaching and I think you can really help me out. And then there's another group that gets nominated by their leadership at their company to go through a coaching program. So it's that group of people that, I never know where they are in terms of like their mindset coming into coaching, because they're not the ones that, kind of put themselves into a coaching program. They were volunteered and said, oh, I think this is a great opportunity. Why did you go through this coaching program? And so with that group of people, there's definitely a mixed bag there. So some of them are like, oh, I don't even know if I want to do this whole leadership thing. Like, I don't, I'm not sure. And then I help them kind of navigate that. But especially from an introverted perspective, also helping give them the tools to be able to advocate for themselves as well, right? So be really clear on how to communicate in a way where they can be really specific and concise about what they want and what they need and all of that, and being able to have the conversations with their leadership if they're not sure, or if they just need some help to figure out what's the right space for them. And so, yeah, it is very interesting. Some people are like, yeah, I feel like this is the way I'm supposed to go. And I just want to be able to support my team. And, I love that aspect of it. And there's other people that are not so sure. And they're like, oh, I don't know about this. I'm up for promotion, or I have been promoted, but I really just don't know if this is the right fit for me. So that's a really good point. So I love that you asked that.
I just had a conversation with one of my colleagues on the executive team, and he's got a manager, a director who does a great job, is really committed. It's in this, kind of IT software side of things. And he's pretty introverted, and he's got a team of deeply introverted people. And he's like, he told my colleague today or this week, he's like, I'm pretty introverted, but even this is too much. Like, he's trying to figure out like, okay, folks, we gotta build some community and some connection and some, right. And so it's kind of an interesting situation where he's introverted, but he's struggling to get his introverted team, right, to kind of bond and come together. So it's not always introverts trying to lead extroverts. It's,
Introverts leading
exactly.
extreme introverts.
it's a whole lot.
And I love that you brought that up, Laurie, because as a leader, even, as an introverted leader, even if you know that you're an introvert, it's so important to understand how you're wired and what's the best way you can communicate with your team, whether they're introverts or extroverts.
Right.
So I love that leader even recognized that. And it's like, okay, I have this team of introverts, but now what do I do? I'm an introvert myself, but how do I navigate the situation? Yeah. And so, I think that's such a good point, that even as an introverted leader, even if you are, if you are leading other introverts, there's a certain dynamic, or there's certain things that you have to be aware of from your own leadership perspective. Like, what is your leadership style and approach and your own introverted tendencies or way that you approach leadership? And then also, what does your team need from you, right? Because everyone is so different, even though they might all be introverts. Everyone's going to need something slightly different. Everyone, it makes me think of the book by Gary Chapman, what is it called? It's the guy who wrote the love languages, the languages of appreciation, languages of appreciation in the workplace. So even within an introverted group, those things are going to be different, right? So how people receive feedback is going to be different from one person to another. So as an introverted leader, first of all, knowing your strengths, knowing how, what your style and approach is and what's most effective for you, but then also understanding your team as individuals and what do they need in order to be more engaged, in order to be, to communicate better or whatever it is. And another huge component of this is psychological safety, right? So being really intentional about creating that safe environment so that when you have those conversations, your team feels like, it's a safe place. Sometimes it just takes time, right? It's no fault of the leader. Sometimes, especially as introverts, sometimes it takes a little bit of time to open up, to feel comfortable, to get to a place where, they feel like, okay, I'm free to engage in conversation or whatever it is.
Yeah, he said there's a person who joined their team 6 or 7 months ago, and he says, I think I've seen him on camera twice ever. Who works remote.
Right. Oh, that's funny. Yeah, I definitely see that. It's interesting to me, like whenever I'm in a Zoom meeting or anything like that, to see, which people have their cameras off generally, and then which ones tend to be on camera. I mean, that's not a specific indication of introversion or extroversion. It's just fascinating to me.
Yeah.
So, question for you, because people define, you said that's not a delineation of introversion, extroversion. People decide what that means. Let's start off here by having you define, what is an introvert? What does that mean to you?
Oh, I love this question. So there's so many ways of interpreting this. And this is another thing to be mindful of when anyone is using the term, especially in the context of a team, because people are going to have different interpretations of what that is. But the one that I tend to gravitate towards is, where it talks about introversion being an extroversion, where you get your energy. So introverts tend to get their energy from, being by themselves, taking time away from other people to recharge and regroup, and then being able to engage. So they're definitely not, and I say this also because I was labeled as a child like antisocial, right? So it's very easy to misunderstand that. But it's not that, like me as an introvert, I love being around people, but I also have to be very intentional about that, because I know there can be times when I feel very drained and that kind of thing. So I have to just be mindful of what I need in order to show up as the best version of myself in those situations. But then for extroverts, they tend to get their energy when they're around other people. It's not, and I've had many extroverts that I coach as well, who will talk about how they're like, yeah, but I also like my quiet time. And so it's not a hard and fast rule. It's just your natural tendency. Like, do you tend to gravitate towards, being by yourself when you feel a little bit overwhelmed by the workday or by being around, people after a while? Or do you crave that social interaction and you feel really energized by that when you're done? So that's where I tend to, lean when it comes to the definition and how to identify introverts versus extroverts. But of course, it's nothing, it's not specific. There's so many variations to that. And there's so many other terms that people use to describe that as well.
As an introvert, I love when I work with a client long enough, and Ruby's seen this, and people, they laugh at me. I have clients that we get to the end of a day of facilitation. We've been in the room all day. It's been a long day. Ruby and I have been in front of the room. We've been exerting a lot of energy. And it's funny because a lot of times at the end of the day, the team that we're working with is planning on going off and doing whatever their fun thing is.
Oh, yes.
And they'll say, we're going to invite you to, but I know that guy, and they point at me, needs his introvert time. I had another client that said, because I always wear baseball hats except when I'm facilitating, and they'll see me put the hat back on, and somebody mentioned to Ruby one time, oh, I see Fun Eric needs to go back to his room. That's what's happening, right?
But so, it is fascinating because, I mean, and Eric is also a musician, right? So he can be the front man in a band and be like high energy and singing and engaging and telling jokes and, interacting. And I know that he is going to be completely exhausted, right? At the end of that, it's like,
done, out. Well, I mean, that's a great segue, right? Because the corporate world, it can be said that corporate life celebrates extroversion, right? The extroverts get the rewards. You want that charismatic CEO, all of that leadership out loud kind of thing. But Sharissa, you have some ideas about the superpowers that introverts have.
Yes.
What are those superpowers, and why are they important?
Yeah, absolutely. So actually what I wanted to do, just based on what you were just saying, is share a statistic that I came across recently, and this is based on several different research studies, that there's actually around 40% of our leaders in the workplace that are introverts. And so even though in a corporate space, typically speaking, we tend to, like you said, like highlight our extroverts and things like that. And a lot of feedback that the introverts get are things like, we'd love to see more executive presence. We'd love to see you speak up more, things like that. Obviously nothing wrong with those particular comments, but I think it's also helpful to recognize that there's there's a big population of introverts in the workplace. And not only that, but there's also, a large population of CEOs and executives that are also introverts. So it doesn't mean that because you're not more extroverted, that you need to be more extroverted in order to, climb the corporate ladder or get those promotions or whatever it is. There's definitely ways for you to stand out as an introverted leader. You just have to know how to, play to those strengths. So coming back to what you were saying about those superpowers. So for introverted leaders, and this is, just generally, these are some of the key superpowers that introverts have. So they tend, because they are very reflective, and so introverts tend to be, like deep thinkers. They absorb a lot from their environment. They take in a lot from conversation and things like that. They're also naturally curious. So when they're having a conversation, they like to hear, they're good listeners, active listeners. And they also like to, ask questions, and they're curious about other people and, what's going on in their lives and environments and different things like that. They also tend to be very empathetic. So very cued in with, what's going on an emotional intelligence level. And then also they're very good on the one-on-one interactions or small group interactions as well, but definitely the one-on-one. And so it's not that they don't enjoy being around people, but they do enjoy that, the smaller, more kind of intimate, settings where they have the ability to really just shine and they feel more comfortable and things like that. Now, of course, that's not always the case, but generally speaking, those are some of the superpowers. The other thing is when it comes to combining that introversion with servant leadership, the focus is on service, right? The focus is on, okay, how do I help other people? How do I connect really well with others so that I can serve, so I can see how I can help out without, they don't generally tend to want to gravitate into the limelight or the spotlight. They do a lot of the work and communication and connections and all of that happen, behind the scenes for the most part. It doesn't mean that they can't contribute or they won't contribute in a group setting, but their natural tendency would be to have a different approach with how they communicate with people and what they communicate. And they're very deliberative when they speak, because they take time to kind of internally process and take in all the information. When they do speak, people, and I always tell my introverted leaders this, that people tend to sit up and pay attention when they do speak, because they're not always going to be the loudest in the room. They're not always going to be the ones that are the most vocal. But when they do speak, people do pay attention because they know that they've taken the time to process, to think through, and then to provide an answer or a decision or whatever the case may be. So those are just some of the superpowers of introverts.
I love what you just said, and it made me think of something that Ruby and I talk about all the time. We do a lot of work with the DISC assessment, right? So,
yes.
And we talk about people being on the top half of the model, the D's and the I's of the world. They talk to think. They think out loud, right?
Yes.
the bottom half of the model people, the C's and the S's, they think before they speak, right? So to your point, when they speak, people tend to listen because they've thought it through. One of the situations that we see regularly where that gets in the way is if you have a proportion of the team that is more think out loud than think before you speak, the think out loud people start writing stories about why the think before you speak people aren't participating in the conversation. They're sitting back, right? And a lot of times it's a conversation that wasn't on the agenda. I had no time to prep. I didn't know this was a thing we were going to talk about today. And you folks are getting all jacked up about this fun idea that we're kicking around. And I'm sitting in the back going, I don't want to be married to anything that comes out of my mouth because I haven't thought about this yet.
Yes.
So when you're in those sort of dynamics as an introverted leader, how do you make sure that you can crush those stories that I'm not checked out? I do care about these things, but I want to think about it, and I need a hot minute before I can react to the thing that you guys are going back to your, where do you get your energy? You guys are gaining energy as you're talking about it. And It's draining energy out of me just thinking about it here in real time, trying to keep up with you.
Absolutely. And I can so relate to that. I've been in so many of those meetings where I walk in and I'm like, I don't even know what exactly we're trying to, achieve here. I don't know if I don't feel prepared for whatever it is. And that's one of the things I always tell my introverts: don't be afraid to ask for what you need. So, for example, in that kind of situation, if you're going into a meeting, there's nothing wrong with you asking, whoever's coordinating that meeting or hosting that meeting, the questions are like, what is the agenda, right? So what is the objective? What are we trying to achieve? What is my role here? What are you looking for from me specifically? So things like that. There's nothing wrong with asking those questions ahead of time if you don't already have that information, so that you can feel mentally prepared to go into that kind of conversation. It doesn't mean that you'll have, because a lot of times it depends on the nature of the meeting, right? So if it's a brainstorming meeting, you can't always be specifically prepared. I mean, you can to a certain degree, but then you're going to be like going back and forth and having a discussion. But when you're mentally prepared for the nature of that meeting and what the objective is and what your role is, it just becomes so much easier. But also, the other thing I tell my introverts is, don't ever be afraid to say, you know what, I just need a little bit of time to process all of this. It's all great information. I just need a little bit of time to kind of take this away, sit with it for a while, and then provide some feedback. Of course, in some instances, it requires a quicker response. Sure. But most of the time, that's perfectly fine, and that's okay. People just feel this need, and I've done this before. I've sat in meetings like where I'm like, I feel this. Internally, I'm feeling this pressure to say something, to speak up, to add value in some way. When really it's not always necessary in that moment, in the spot, on the spot. And it's going to be a lot better if you can have that moment to take away the information, process it, and come back with a really thoughtful, response.
One of the things that we talk about when we're doing intact teamwork is we tell those think out loud people, the people who go, agenda schmagenda, we don't need an agenda.
We can wing it.
Actually, an agenda is helpful for those people that aren't like you, buddy. And we also counsel them to understand the idea that giving people a minute to process doesn't mean it has to be 3 days, right? Maybe it's an hour. Right? Maybe it's, hey, let me take a lap around the building and process this, and I'll come back. Yeah. Let's just take a break. 10 minutes. Let me walk around, think about it, and I'll get my ducks in a row and come back and be ready to contribute. Another thing you said too, if I know it's a brainstorming session, even if I'm not clear on the topic, I come in a different space in my mind.
Exactly. Yes.
Right?
You expect the rapid and the random.
Yes.
It's when the brainstorming session materializes out of nothing, and all of a sudden somebody jumps up and they're jamming things onto the whiteboard, and I'm like, I didn't know. Why are we talking about this today? What?
Right.
Well,
that's what my head sounds like. Like I can't even. And then I'm in my head and I'm not even listening to what you guys are talking about.
Yeah,
that's so true. That's such a good point. That a lot of with the introverts, you can interact, like that dialogue is going to go in your mind, and it's taking away from actually being present in that meeting. So great point.
Yeah, and I think that's another one of those asking for what you need moments to just say, hey, clarifying question: are we trying to make a decision about this today, or are we just brainstorming? Right, like being able to get, and maybe draw a little bit of attention to what's the goal here? What are we trying to do? Because then you might need to say, I really want to contribute, but I'm going to need a minute. Right. This is a lot of stuff. So I'd like to process, but I'd like to be part of the decision if that needs to happen today.
Well, and Ruby just dropped into chat where some people go, and it's where I go all the time. We start making up stories about ourselves, about how we're not smart enough. We can't do the thing that's happening out by the whiteboard right now. Like I can't jump in and do that right in this minute. So I must not be as good as them. Right. Because I start that negative self-talk narrative that comes into play. And for me, right, I'm a depression and anxiety person. That shit comes in real fast. Like the switch flips, the circuit completes. And now not only am I not listening to you, but I am smack talking myself in my mind.
Yeah. And thank you so much for bringing that up, Eric, because I can't even tell you how many years that was me in my career for years and years and years, all in my head about like the comparison trap is what I call it, right? Like comparing myself to others. Oh, I don't think as quickly as they do. And how am I supposed to engage in this? And, what are they're going to think about me and all of those things. So it just spirals so quickly in those types of situations. And so one other thing is also for whoever's coordinating that to make sure to give space to these people. Like there's going to be people in there, right, who are introverts or who may need a minute to process, or who just might not be as up to speed maybe as the rest of the group, right? So to give the time and space and to say, okay, so I recognize there's different people in this room. There's going to be some people that won't hesitate to speak up, but also being intentional and call it, not necessarily like putting people on the spot, but creating the space and maybe letting people know ahead of time, hey, towards the end of this discussion, we're going to go around the room and give everyone an opportunity just to provide any kind of, feedback, summary, give their thoughts on what we discussed. So when the introverts know that ahead of time, they can start to at least process through some of the things. And then at the end say, okay, this is what I'm taking away, but I need some time to process whatever it is, A, B, and C. And then I'll come back with a more thorough response or whatever that case is. There's
a technique that we use at SkyTeam when we're trying to get all of the voices in the room to be heard about a thing. And we call it focus group technique because it's how we do focus groups, not because anybody deemed it that. We do focus groups this way so that we ensure that all of the voices get heard. And we do it by making it such that nobody talks when we're gathering the data. So if we have the questions or the things that we want to brainstorm or the things we want to get input on, we put those up on flip charts around the room. And then we'll do some sort of icebreaker that's connected to music. We'll ask people, what's the first concert they went to, or the first album they bought if they're as old as me, or the first music that they stole off of Napster or whatever, right? And then we'll set them up with, okay, what we want you to do is take the next X number of minutes and answer the questions that are on the flip charts around the room using our good friends' Post-it notes, right? So everybody's got a stack of Post-it notes, and they're going to look at the questions, and they're going to put in their answers, one thought per note. And while they're doing that, I'm going to, or somebody at the front of the room is going to play songs from those first records, concerts, whatever. So they're going to hear their own music, right? Which is really fun to watch because when your song comes on, I can tell just by watching, right? Yeah. Watching the person go, oh, that's Backstreet Boys. That was my first concert. And they start, moving around or whatever. But we do that so that everybody has ample time to process. Now, granted, right, those extroverted folks who are talk to think people are scribbling. They're scribbling lots of stuff. And maybe they have 2 times the amount of Post-it notes. But we give ample time because we set the expectation that I want at least one answer per question from everybody in the room. And then as they're putting the answers up on the wall, we'll walk around the room and sort of group them up. And then we're going to talk about the things that have the groups that have the biggest sort of representation on those charts. And we found that is a super way to make sure that at least everybody gets the opportunity. Now, what may happen is those more introverted folks may come back tomorrow and go, hey, I I have 12 more sticky notes. Can I still put them on the thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, of course you can.
Yeah.
Of course you can.
You know, Lisa in the chat mentioned that sense of overwhelming, right? When things just sort of take off and the introverts in the group start to like their central nervous system just got attacked.
Breaks down.
Right.
It completely breaks down.
Yeah. But what's happening for the extroverted folks is they're like, yeah. Awesome. When you said that, it made me think of that. And this is cool, right? And so that awareness and with intact teams, being able to identify that and have that conversation about, preferences and those kinds of things, so that over time you can start to, first of all, the introverts can go, hang on, you guys, just calm down. Like, what are we doing? Right. And can feel empowered to do that. And the extroverts can remember, hey, take a breath so that Ruby has a chance to say something. Invite Ruby into the conversation because we're just steamrolling past. And that's, that group awareness is so important.
Oh, I love that. That's such a good point. And thank you for mentioning that, Lisa, about the overwhelm and all of that. And I think that's another good reminder for facilitators, or it could be anyone really, it doesn't have to be the facilitator, to check in with people in the room, right? To check in and say, okay, how are we doing? Anyone have questions? How are we feeling about where we are right now? What would you like to see? Anything like that, to get a little bit of engagement and to give people that maybe haven't had a chance to speak up, to just give their opinion on how they feel, things are going, or even if you want to do it in a more, private. I love the sticky note idea. I think that's absolutely brilliant. That used to be my favorite way to get ideas and all of that is that on the board and then the sticky notes. That's really cool. But there's so many different ways to go about getting that and just check in, right? Getting a pulse on, okay, where are we? How are people in the room feeling? Rather than just keep going. And then you get to the end and you have, maybe half your room who's
Right.
completely overwhelmed because you lost them, 40 minutes in or whatever the case is.
Well, and the energy that the extroverts that are all fired up now can kind of take over the feeling of the room, right? And it's big enough such that when we ring the bell and end the meeting, those people feel like it was great. And there's a proportion of the team that walks out of the room and goes, what just happened?
Right.
Do I have work to do now? Is that something new? Do we decide a thing? And the people that
they just got completely left out.
Right.
Like I couldn't even get a word in edgewise, and now my opinion is not part of the knowledge. Right. Yeah. So
it's a good pivot into service-based leadership or servant leadership. So, Sharissa, if I'm in these situations where I know this is going on, I see these disconnected factions in the room, how do I put my servant leader hat on and help those folks get back into the flow? How do I help them?
Okay. So just so I understand, do you mean bring in the introverts into the conversation? Or at least check in and see where they are? And
the unheard voice in the room, I'm seeing it happen. And I know that I want to start to flex my servant leader principles. So, what are those? What does it mean to be a servant leader? Because, you've mentioned a couple of times I wanted to help people and I want to lead by doing. And so how do I make sure that we're not exercising a subset of our population by leveraging those principles?
That's a really great question. So as far as with servant leadership and what that means, it's basically just being people focused and being others focused. So thinking about, okay, how is this impacting other people? How do I add value in the situation? So focusing much more on serving and, just helping and supporting others. So in that kind of situation, of course, it's a lot more difficult when you're right in the middle of it, because the other thing you want to be very careful of is not making any assumptions, right? So just because somebody's not saying anything, you don't necessarily want to put them on the spot if they really don't, if they don't want to be put on the spot, or if they really don't have anything anything to contribute at that particular time. So you have to be careful about how you engage and also the questions to ask, in that moment. So, and I think the quick pulse checks and also letting them know ahead of time is always going to be the best, right? Letting them know, hey, this is the type of meeting we're having. We're going to be checking in and seeing how, just getting feedback from everyone as we go through. So that way they're already starting to think about, okay, what am I processing? What am I taking in? What questions do I have? And also for the people that tend to hold back a little bit, like the more introverted side, thinking about even if they're getting lost in the sauce, like everything that's going on and the conversation is going so fast, if they need to clarify, like not being afraid to ask clarifying questions too, even if it was something that, that was talked about, 10 minutes and the conversation has passed. If they feel like there's one thing that they latched onto and they're like, you know what, I really feel like I need to get clarification on that, or there's something I have to contribute to that. Not being afraid to, to say, okay, why is everyone, does anyone have any questions on anything? And so for those introverted people, again, to advocate for themselves and say, hey, okay, we talked about this a little while ago, but I just wanted to ask a clarifying question. So even if you feel like the conversation is going so fast and you don't have time to process all of the little details, there might be one thing that stands out to you and you're like, oh, I just need a little bit more information. Or can you clarify that? Or can you summarize what you were just talking about on that particular topic? Because a lot of times you get, it's easy to get lost in the whole conversation. But if there's just one thing that you're like, if I could just get a little bit of clarity on this thing in this moment, it would just really help me to either engage more or just to process a little bit better, even if you're if the rest of the conversation is just like going so
rapid
fast.
Fire. Yeah.
Rapid fire. Yeah. So there's a couple of different things, but I would say as a servant leader in that, in that meeting, be very conscious of how everyone is showing up. Again, you don't want to make assumptions, but that's a good opportunity also for after the meeting to check in with people, right? If you're noticing certain things with body language, if people seem to be lost at a certain point or they're not engaged, like they say there's a certain point in the meeting where everything just got a little bit quieter, or there's certain people that just kind of withdraw in the conversation, just checking in with them after the fact and saying, oh, how did you think that meeting went? What did you take away? Things like that. You don't always want to bring it up in the meeting on the spot because you just never know, right? You don't want to make an assumption that something's not right. Because there could be anything going on, right? There could be, like,
Sure.
for example, some people are just quiet and withdrawn because there's something going on in their personal life or something just happened and they're just not there mentally, right? And not able to engage. It could have nothing to do with the content of the meeting. So that's what I would suggest, is rather than trying to address it right there in the moment, unless it's, critical that you do. But other than that, for the most part, just check in with people one-on-one afterwards, just to say, okay, how did that go? How do you think it could have gone better? What are your thoughts on what's going on? So that's what I would suggest to leaders, is just to do the one-on-one check-in rather than calling people out in that group setting.
View. Yeah.
But letting people know ahead of time that if you are going to be asking for people's opinion and checking in, just let everyone know ahead of time so that they're prepared for it. So when you do go around the room, they feel like, okay,
Right.
I'm ready because I knew to expect that early on.
And I would think it would be comforting to someone who's more introverted to, we say, make the implicit explicit, right? Extroverts, it's implied that the stuff that's running out of my mouth may or may not be used, and we're just spitballing here and whatever, right? But to actually say, hey, we want to have this discussion, and we don't have complete information, and it's okay to just kind of share what comes to you top of mind. You won't be held to it, right? Sort of like releasing the pressure valve on the introvert to say, well, if I say a thing and it turns out to be wrong, well, then I shouldn't have said anything, right? But just granting permission, it's all good. Yeah.
Oh, that's so good. I love that. I call that framing the conversation. So letting people know at the beginning of the meeting or even midway through, saying it's exactly what you just said, Laurie. And I love that you touched on that. So letting people know, hey, it's okay. It doesn't have to be perfect. We just want to hear your thoughts for right now. We're not asking you to commit to anything. Just tell us what's going on. Any questions or what's going on? How are you processing through all of this? Or what are you taking away? That way, like you said, it gives people an out if they feel like, oh, I don't want to really commit to this because I haven't processed fully. It gives them an opportunity to say, I can share something, but knowing that it's not, I don't have all the information I need. Yeah. Sorry, I think I cut you off there.
No. All good stuff. It just made me think, one of the things that I like to do when we're working with Intech teams, and sometimes we'll actually suggest that they assign somebody to do this job. So when we're working with a team and they're having a business focused discussion, a lot of times what we'll do, and Ruby and I'll do it at the same time, because she hears different things than I hear, is we will take notes on a big flip chart. Like as a conversation sort of settles into a theme, we'll just write that theme down, right? Mm-hmm. And as the DISC-C, INTJ, introverted guy, I love this because as I'm writing it, I'm thinking about it, right? And so as the list starts to materialize, by the time we get to a break point in that conversation, I have thoughts and questions that I'm ready to ask. So, and as a facilitator, right, I don't have any skin in the game in the conversation, so it's super easy for me to do that. But we've actually made the recommendation that, hey, assign somebody to scribe this meeting, not in their notebook, but on the wall, on the whiteboard, on the flip chart, so that they can do it in real time. And what will happen is things will start to theme up, and it gives them a little bit of space where they have a job to do. And B, I don't feel like I have to open my mouth real quick because my job is to write this stuff down. And then I have time to process my thoughts, such that when we take a pause, now I have at least a half formulated thing that I feel reasonably comfortable saying or asking. Right. So giving someone that power to step into their own preference and remain a member of the process. Right. I love that.
Yeah. That's brilliant. I really love that approach. And the other thing that came to mind as you were talking about that as well, especially when it comes to writing things down, is giving people, when you're doing that, or when you're done or you get to a good stopping point, is giving people an opportunity, even if it's like a 2-minute break, right? 2-minute breather. We're just going to pause the meeting right here and give people a time to reflect, take a breath, have a quick conversation, whatever it is, and then regroup so that people have a little bit of that space to process, to do whatever they need to do, maybe go through the notes and, that kind of thing, and formulate any questions or thoughts that they might have based on that. So yeah, I love that idea.
Awesome. Well, you're welcome to all of these ideas because we're going to steal yours too. So
go for it.
So I know we're getting close to the top of the hour here. So I want to leave a few minutes here for Ruby, the rabid note taker over there, to ask any questions that she has. And Lisa, if she has questions too, we want to save some time for that. So Ruby, Lisa, what questions do you have for Sharissa?
I'll go first. I love all of this, just for the record. And I'm sort of formulating a question around balancing service-based leadership with self-care. Because I care deeply about both of these topics, and I would just love to know how you frame that up, or what are some tactics to know when to do which one.
Oh, that's
and knowing
so
that they're not exclusive either.
Sure.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, I love this question. Yeah. And it's so easy, right? Especially when you do have that servant-based or people-focused approach, because you love doing that, right? You love to be able to help and support people, that sometimes it can blur the lines and you can kind of get lost in that so much that it can get a little bit draining, right? Because we all have that point that we get to where it's like, okay, I just need a break, right? Even if we're doing something that we really love. So I love that you're bringing up self-care, because that is incredibly important, because that's part of the fuel that you need in order to be the very best leader that you can be, or to be there for other people. So being very intentional about self-care. One of the other things I'll say about that is just be really aware. So creating a sense of awareness around how you're showing up, what you need, how you feel as you go through different interactions. I always tell my to take a moment to reflect. It's so important. Even if you do this, I normally recommend it at the end of a week, like looking back at the week and going, okay, where did my time go? What took away my energy? What gave me energy? How is it aligning with my priorities? I mean, there's a list of different questions that you can ask yourself to really reflect and check in with yourself and say, okay, based on these things, based on the things that were draining to me, the things that were energizing to me, what do I need as I go into the weekend, as I go into next week, and what activities? And you also have to know yourself well enough to know what other things that are going to energize you, right? So, and also just in general, taking care of yourself, when it comes to self-care, so your nutrition, your sleep, all of those things. And so making sure, and also social connection, because I think people don't talk enough about social connection and how important that is outside of work, right? So being willing to to engage in that, whether it's friends, family, your support system is so important, especially for introverts, right? Having that support system is critical. But all of those different things, and knowing what you need, and being able to check in with yourself, even if it's daily, sometimes on an hourly basis. There've been days where I'm like, okay, how am I doing? What do I need right now? And something as simple as breathing. There's different techniques that I teach my clients, especially those that go like for extended periods of time in back-to-back meetings and all of those things. And it's like, okay, how do I manage? So there's boundaries, which is a whole other topic that we can talk about. But there's boundaries and self-care. So I would say start with awareness. Just kind of start to notice and make note of how you're feeling as you do different activities and as you engage through the week. And how does it align with like making good values-based decisions, right? Things that are important to you. Are you choosing the things that are really important to you? And then checking in with yourself. Am I fueled up enough? Do I have enough in my tank to be able to do the things, to be able to be a servant leader, right? Because if you don't have enough in your tank, then it tends to, you can even resent the very thing that you love to do, right? Because it's like, I'm exhausted. I know I want to do this, but I just have nothing left. And so you just go through it and you're like, oh, I just want to get this over with. And that's really not how you want to do that. But that's a good indicator, right? If you're starting to feel that way and you're dreading certain things, even though before you were like, well, that's something that I like. Why do I feel this way? That's a good time to check in with yourself and say, what do I need to fill up my tank so that I am in the best possible, situation to be able to then give, and also to handle stress. I mean, there's so many different benefits of taking care of yourself, but also just checking in and awareness. So I would say the big words for me when you asked that question, Ruby, was awareness and boundaries.
Yes. Yep. Love
it.
True.
That whole concept of servant leadership means at your personal sacrifice, or 24/7, or at all costs, right? Like nobody said it had to look like that.
Yes.
So give yourself a break, right?
Cut yourself some slack.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you for that question.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Just a really quick one.
Yeah.
And I think most of it was answered just in that last segment, but I have a new boss.
Okay.
And he
congratulations.
is definitely
I'm
an
sorry.
extrovert. Well, yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know yet. The merch is out. He's definitely not an introvert, and I think has some challenges with me being an introvert at times and trying to establish boundaries. And I'm finding myself getting overwhelmed because I'm working many, many hours to try to keep up with his energy. So what recommendations do you have to help that I could take to him to help balance it out a little bit more?
Oh, that's such a good question. I love that. Thanks, Lisa. So the first thing I would say is when you say, tell me a little bit more about that, first of all, because I want to make sure I understand you correctly. When you say like keeping up with his energy, what does that mean? What does that look like for you? Is it working longer hours? What does that look like?
It is. So I like things very structured at times. Sometimes it's okay not to be, but it helps me kind of figure things out. He's the kind of person that will come to my desk out of nowhere and want to do something, have something done. So I have to stop whatever I'm doing, which drives me crazy. And I have to resync and focus on what he wants to focus on. And it's not just every now and then, it's all the time. First, I thought it was just going to be every now and then. I could deal with that, but it's constant. So
that can for sure be very overwhelming, right? Especially if you're more on the introverted side of things, because you like to plan and know what's coming up and you prepare for things. And it can feel like, oh my goodness, what's just coming at me all the time. So I can totally relate to that. So one of the things I would say is like just preparing to have a conversation with him. I know it's not always the easiest or the thing that most people look forward to, but just advocating for yourself in that situation and saying, I want to do the very best that I can to make sure I'm keeping up with, the requests coming in. So think about like what would be in that kind of scenario, knowing that he has these requests that come up, like several times during the day, for example, what would work best for you to be able to support him in what he needs? It doesn't mean like checking all the boxes than doing everything that he needs. But in terms of what you need in the situation, if I were your boss, what would you say to me? What would be your preference in how you want him to communicate with you or, request those things?
Okay.
Yeah. So I know I'm putting you on the spot. You don't have to answer that.
You're asking me to give you. Okay. I thought you were giving.
No, you don't have to answer. I kind of
could just
go
set
coaching
some
mode.
time.
So.
Yeah, like we could just set time up. I even put a calendar together of, okay, this is how I like to structure. Well, you still need to be flexible. I'm like, okay, well, never mind. So if we could just establish, like, maybe at the end of the day, for 2 hours at the end of the day, this is the time frame that I can, really focus in on ad hoc things or something like that. That would be amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's different things that you can. So I don't know what like messaging system you use, for example. So even if he feels like he just needs to get it out and communicate it, maybe you do it through like instant message, like a Slack or something like along those lines, or maybe he puts it in an email that he sends to you. Something like that. So there's other ways of going about it, but also understanding getting to on the same page about what is needed is going to be really important as well. So for example,
that's a good point.
What is the underlying like urgency from his standpoint, or that approach that he's taking, just to get an understanding from him on like, okay, I see that I'm getting a lot of requests every day, and that's fine, and I'm trying my best to address them. Can you tell me a little bit more about the need or the urgency for these requests that come in, so I can have a better understanding of, because there might be some things that are actually urgent and he does need you to to do right away, and there could be other ways like, oh, I just want to get it off out of my brain, and I want to make sure before it leaves my brain. And in that case, then it's for him to just make note of it and maybe send you one message at the end of the day, or communicate with you once during the day on all of those things. And also things change all the time, right? So my guess is even when he's giving you certain things, there's probably things that are going to change in those requests over time. Right. Yeah. So that's a lot easier on both sides, right? So that you're not constantly trying to catch up and change things on the fly, but he has time to then pull everything together and say, okay, this is what I need, and also hopefully he's giving you some kind of time frame so that expectation is really clear.
That's not the case either, but yes.
Yeah, so you definitely want
to love that. That's great. That's awesome. Yeah. Thank you.
So aligning on those expectations. And also, I think the other thing that's really important when you have those conversations, especially since this is a new boss, so you're still kind of forming that relationship with him, is framing what I call like framing a conversation. So when you do have these conversations, letting him know why, and the fact that, you're trying as best as you can to keep up with the request, because you want to make sure that he feels supported and he has what he needs. And then going into, okay, so just, like I would love to chat about like the best ways to work together so I can be the most productive and get all of these things done.
I like that. Right.
And so, so framing the conversation beforehand and just thinking about ways to do that so that before you even get into, okay, what is the solution here? He has an idea of where you're coming from. He has an understanding of why, and he knows exactly, what you're trying to accomplish and why.
Love it. Thank you. Appreciate that.
You're so welcome.
I think the only thing I would add to that, Lisa, is because I've worked for that person that Sharissa mentioned, a use case, and that use case is I just need to get it out of my brain before I forget about it.
Yes,
and that's great. That's and that's great, but I don't know about you, Lisa, but for me, when I get a request from my boss, be it at 2:30 in the afternoon when I'm right smack in the middle of something else and it totally busts my flow, or at 10:30 p.m., I feel obligated to respond, right?
Absolutely, yes.
So
especially when he's in your face, right? What do you do?
So we call these operating agreements, and we cut these deals with one another. And I've had to cut this deal with a leader in the past where I've had to say, look, I don't want to harsh your groove on how you flow, right? You spit things out real time. I get it. That's cool. In our platforms, we use Slack and Google. In Slack and in Gmail, next to the big send button, there's a little down arrow button where you can schedule that shit. So I can type it right now and get it out of my brain and say, little arrow, send this to Lisa at 7:59 a.m. or whatever, right?
Right. Okay.
Just not to blow your flow states. And if it's during the day, and this is another operating agreement deal that I've had to cut with bosses in the past, you have access to my calendar. My calendar is open. You can see all the details. before you randomly machine gun Slack me 18 messages in a row, please take a peek to see if I'm facilitating a meeting, on a call, or doing a thing. Because if I forgot to turn my messages off because I wasn't doing a coaching thing, but I was doing something a little bit more loose, but I'm in my flow state writing content, say, and my Slack bell goes off 9 times in a row, well, I'm out of flow state now. So do me the favor of, if you just have just a quick question, like that, person that used to pop by your cube and stick their face in and go, "Hey, got a second?" To which I would always go, "Yeah."
No.
What do you say? It just fucking get it out, say it, and then get out of here. And then I would inadvertently commit to stuff because I just said the thing that made them go away fast.
Nice.
Right. So cutting that deal to say, hey, schedule things, get them out of your head, like say them when you need to say them, but send them to me when I can receive them. Because that's a pretty easy deal to cut.
I love it. I love that concept of operational. What did you call it?
Operating agreements.
Operating agreements. I love that.
It's just how we do business, right? It's like a SLA. And if you could do me the favor of just clicking on my calendar button before you rapid Slack me, that would be great. Because,
or if you must, just random chain of consciousness, flow of consciousness. Just give me the alert on what's urgent.
Right.
Right. Or clarify, like not urgent. Like I'll say, because I have people on my team, as much as I say it, that I don't expect immediate response. They're very responsible and they're very go after it. And so I will explicitly say not urgent, or I will explicitly say for tomorrow.
Right.
That's great. Because he will pop by. What about this idea? Can you do this? Can you do this? And then 15 to 20 minutes later, how's it coming? I am like, I didn't even know you wanted it right now.
Yeah.
But he's just doing him, right? He's not doing it to be mean or to drive extra work, right? It's just how he rolls. And that's cool. And it's not how you roll. So the art here is in finding that middle ground of, how does he get to satisfy all the things that make him who he is that doesn't totally bust your groove?
Right.
Right. And that's the trade-offs of operating agreements. And, like I've worked for the person who was like, "Oh, I don't want to schedule it. It's so much extra work." I'm like, it's literally the same work. It's just clicking a different button and then clicking one more time. That's all you have to do. And looking at my calendar, it's literally clicking one button. It takes you no time at all. Right. So navigating that middle ground, it's actually going to help build the relationship and deepen that relationship. Right. Ruby just said you can access your superpowers when you're in that groove, and he wants that.
I saw that. I love it.
Absolutely.
Yes. Very true. Very true.
This conversation is awesome, and I could go on for another hour, but we're already 6 minutes over. So before we close down on Sharissa, where can we go, Sharissa, to learn more about you out on the interwebs?
Oh, thank you for asking, Eric. My website is leadershipmasteryalliance.com, and you can find out all about the work that we do, and reach out to me as well at info at Leadership Mastery Alliance. If you have any questions, or if you just want to connect with me, you can do that on LinkedIn as well. Thank you so much. This was so much fun. I can't believe we're already at time.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for being here. Thanks for sharing your expertise. Like I always say, guests are welcome at our end of show ritual, but I know that you're in Florida and it is 7:00 there. So you're free to go if you like, but it's going to be good stuff. We're going to talk about funny shit now. So funny things from the internet that made Eric laugh this week. I think we can all relate here. Used to sneak out my house to go to parties. Now I sneak out of parties to go to my house.
Eric, I love that.
That is for the introverts that are still listening.
So good.
And the introverted competence people, you'll love this one. Group projects in school weren't meant to teach you teamwork. They were meant to teach you how to deal with the incompetence of your coworkers in the workplace. True story.
So true.
That feels true.
Funny thing number 3 is from the Roman numerals department. It is a sign showing a Five Guys restaurant with some of the lights burned out. The F and the E are out, so it's IV guys. And the guy said, whoa, I guess one dude quit. And then the I went out, so it's just the V. Nah, it's all good. He came back. The bartender episode that we just put out this week with Nada Sanders was about AI. And I've had this experience where AI got it blatantly wrong. This one's fun. This is a person saying, our jobs are safe, fam, from AI. The challenge here for AI was sister's age calculation. It says, the query, the prompt, when I was 6, my sister was half my age. Now I'm 70. How old is my sister? ChatGPT said, if you were 70 years old and your sister was half your age when you were 6, then your sister was, and it shows the math, 6 divided by 2 equals parentheses, 6 divided by 2 equals 3, close parentheses, 3 years old when you were 6. If you were 3 years old, if your sister was 3 years old when you were 6 and you are now 70, your sister is now, and it does the math again, 73 years old. It gets the math backwards because the sister should be 3 years younger than the person who is 70, not 73 years old. Again, our jobs are safe.
I love how you geeked out on the math to such a
Yes.
like, did you want to make a spreadsheet out of it and like?
No, but I did do the math the way that it did it just to make sure that it was wrong. This one is because Lori just changed her name and she knows what this is like. And as kids, we all get a social security card at some point in time, right? Hey kid, here's some identification you'll need from the rest of your life, but you're not allowed to laminate it. So we went ahead and printed it on gas station toilet paper for you.
Seriously.
Because if anybody has their social security card from when they were 10 years old, it probably looks like this picture right now.
I have it, and it does.
But my favorite funny thing today is from the karma department. It is, I told my dad I ran out of alcohol and didn't have any money to buy any for the weekend. So he gave me the huge bottle of vodka from the cupboard that I stole and replaced with water when I was 16. Life really does come back to bite you in the ass. Oh, today's good feel story is not going to make you cry, but it's going to make you go, what? Go, Steve.
Finally tonight, the story of a young man who can teach us the difference between having sight and having vision. Here's CBS's Steve Hartman on the road.
Come on,
That's
Ruby.
incredible.
Ruby,
What the?
talk about deep presence and listening. You talk about this all the time. When I watched this, I was thinking this can be a thing that we remind people of. This is how possible this is. Right?
That's
And to pick up all the nuance in even just sound.
Yeah.
But
Bananas.
when he's calling those games, he can't be anywhere else.
Can't
he can
be.
only be there. Yeah.
I mean, I thought that was
Wow.
a beautiful example.
Mhm.
Oh. Say, I told you it wasn't going to make you cry, which is a good thing, but it's still a good story. Today's semi-quarantine cocktail is called the Stoned Rat, which sounds like a band that I would have played in 1989. It's a riff on the Rat's Tail cocktail. You're going to need 2 ounces of spiced rum, 1 Houston police evidence locker room, 1 ounce of fresh lime juice, and 1 rat infestation who now have drug addictions.
Oh boy.
A little bit of simple syrup. Over 3,600 cases have been impacted as evidence has been tampered with or goes missing. And a slice of jalapeno on the top. It seems that the rats prefer weed, and there is over 400,000 pounds of weed in this evidence locker. So they got a steady supply, but they also like getting into the shrooms from time to time. You're going to need a slice of cucumber. And I thought this was really funny. The spokesperson said, it's really difficult getting the rodents out of there. I mean, they're drug addicted rats, so they're kind of tough to deal with.
Creepy.
Thank you, everybody, for being here today. Thanks to Sharissa Deppen. Thanks to each and every one of you in the listening audience. It is time for dinner time. Take care, everybody. We'll see you next week.
Thank you so much for joining us today. If you had a good time and learned a thing or two at today's happy hour, please share it with your friends. If you want to join our tribe, head on over to skyeteam.cloud/TCB or email us at info@skyeteam.com. That's SKYE team.com. Thanks again, and remember, you've always got friends at the Corporate Bartender.